pleased and very honoured to have very pleased and very honoured to have Emma Louisa Cahill Marron to speak to us this evening. And I'm going to tell you about her in a second. Emma earned a Bachelor of Arts in History in 2011. The following year, she completed a Master of Arts in Spanish Monarchy. Over the course of the last decade, she has published many articles and book chapters about the artistic and cultural relations between the Tudor dynasty and the Spanish monarchy. She specializes in the patronage of Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish infanta who became Queen of England by marriage to Henry VIII in 1509. In the summer of 2022, Emma completed a PhD in art history, the University of Murcia, a dissertation, Art and Magnificence in the Construction of the Image of Female Power in the Beginning of the Modern Age, Queen Catherine of Aragon and Renaissance Culture, received a qualification cum laude. She is currently preparing a publication, the publication of this study, as well as a new cultural biography of Catherine of Aragon. Over the course of her research career, she has given several conferences, like in the spring of 2022, at the Prado Museum, dealing with the portrait exchanges between Spain and England in the 15th and 16th century. And she gave a spring lecture this year at the American University in Washington, DC. She is, in 2022, British Spanish scholar, and she has recently received the Arts CEES Travel Scholarship to carry out research in Madrid and London. This new project, titled Portraiture, Gender and the Construction of the Image of Power in the Beginning of the Royal Collection Trust and the Prado Museum, aims to showcase the importance that women had in the configuration of two of the most important royal collections in the world. That's quite a biography. We're very pleased to welcome her, and here she is.
Hi, thanks, Tim. Well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I want to thank everybody for being so kind as to invite me, everyone at the English Catholic Association, everyone present here today. I do have the chat open. I hope this can be a bit informal. If you want to ask questions, I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to manage them at the time. I see here, hi from Liverpool, hi from Toledo. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. And as I say, thank you for the English Catholic History Association to invite me. I learned about these talks attending to talks. So I attended to several talks on Mary I, and I thought it was just wonderful that they can give people this opportunity, especially since we're not all in the same spot, right? So I reached out. They were wonderful. They've been very nice. So I want to thank everyone there and everyone today for coming to hear me talk about this topic. I've never talked about this topic per se, but obviously I've thought about this a lot, obviously, because Catherine of Aragon is such a representative person of the Catholic faith in Renaissance Europe, really, not only England. So of course, I've over the course of my research career, I've thought a lot about what it meant to be a Catholic, for example, at the end of the 15th century in England, what it meant to be a Catholic at the time Catherine was a Catholic in the late 1520s, when she represented started representing what was in some time the minority in England. And not only a minority, but in religious conflict with the majority. I will end up talking, of course, about her daughter too, and how that develops. But mainly, I'm going to concentrate on Catherine and why. What are the reasons that I believe that make her a Catholic icon? And I titled it in England, but really, Catherine of Aragon is a European figure. So we shouldn't lose track of what's going on in Europe to analyze her Catholic faith, or the way she developed that Catholic faith, because really she has an intense relationship with the Spanish Empire, as you know, because she comes from there and she becomes an ambassadress of the Spanish Empire. Then she's, because of that, she's linked to the Empire, to the German Empire, because her nephew becomes the Holy Roman Emperor, and she has the ability and the to bring him to England to engage in European affairs with Henry VIII, because she has such powerful relatives. And also other territories linked to the Spanish monarchy, like the Netherlands, that are key in this time for the introduction of many things and the development of the Renaissance, and the introduction of another key aspect that is linked to the Catholic faith, humanism, the humanist movement. And then because the Spanish Empire also has relations with, intense relations with Italy, and they're advocates for Rome, she becomes a very representative figure of the distance between England and Rome, and the closeness that brings. The whole Reformation brings Spain and Rome closer than ever together. So she's a good example of how that develops in England, but also in Europe. So let's always keep in mind that she's a European figure. So I want to start. Let's see if my PowerPoint works here. Okay, it works. So I recently got these pictures from one of my friends in Spain, and this is in Alcalá de Henares, and I put it in the map. I wanted to put it in the map so you guys can see more or less where Catherine of Aragon was born. She was born outside of Madrid in a place called Alcalá de Henares. It is a place that it is well known because it had a very prestigious university. And one of the things that is very important about Catherine is to know that her parents were very involved in the Reformation of the Catholic faith in Spain. And that went through places like the universities. These universities were usually founded by bishops and other religious people. So, I mean, this is all linked to the Catholic faith and the spread of that humanism that I was telling you about. So the Spanish court of Isabella and Ferdinando, where we all know Catherine was born, did not have a place where they stayed all the time. They were moving from place to place. And that is because in the Iberian Peninsula, they still have in this time, they still have this idea that there's a need of the presence of the monarch. And Isabella and Fernando are King and Queen of Castile, the crown of Castile, which compromises several kingdoms, and also the crown of Aragon. So they need to keep moving around because in Spain, there are big cities that require their attention. The king and the queen are there they need to travel there to make justice. And that's something that they carry still from the medieval times, because the presence of the king in each kingdom is important, but they're trying to start to centralize, and that will develop later in the 16th century with other Spanish monarchs, especially with Philip II, that centralization of the court in Madrid, that does not exist at the time of the Catholic monarchs. So despite the fact that Catherine of Aragon was born in Alcalá de Henares, it doesn't mean that was the capital of Spain at the time. It was just a very important center because there was a very important university founded by a very important bishop. So usually the court would be there in December. I've found traces of them for years there. So Catherine was born there because they were there when Catherine was born in December. But it's very representative that she was born there because this is a very important place for the development of that humanist Renaissance that Isabella and Ferdinand developed with the fostering of things like in Alcalá de Henares, we find a very good example is the publication of religious texts, but translated and they're trying to go back to the classics and to the origin of the Bible and the first text and translate them. So they're doing an effort to reform the Catholic faith. That has been overshadowed in some places because the Reformation took other turns in England or in Germany, but in Spain they were already doing that through the patronage of the translations of texts and also the publications of these texts, like in this case, on January 1514, when Catherine of Aragon was already Queen of England, at the University of Alcalá de Henares, where she was born, the first volume of the Polyglot Bible was published. This Bible was published in 6 languages. And in the inventory of the goods of Henry VIII, we find a copy of this. So this means that this reached England. So this starts to tell you a little bit about how Catherine developed this prestige about being a defendress of the faith that we will see and talk about later. So this is a good example of how important different cities in Spain were for this humanistic renaissance that was linked to the Catholic faith of Isabella and Fernando. Catherine grew up there. She was there for 15 years, so she was shaped by her parents. It's not like in other cases where the princesses would travel younger. She was already a teenager when she traveled to England. So just so you get an idea of the complexity of this project that was embarked to do this polyglot Bible, take a look. It was published in 6 volumes. The first 4 volumes cover the Old Testament, and you can see there how they were laid out. So there were Latin, Greek, and it was also in the Aramaic text. And then volume 5 would cover the New Testament, and those come from there were parallel columns of Greek and the Latin Vulgate. And the 6th one was, of course, a dictionary to help you to read this thing, because imagine the complexity. Probably was just like a guideline. I've never actually seen one, so I in the future I would like to, because it seems like something wonderful to look at. Not that I would understand much of it, because I don't speak many of these languages. And it's also important that Antonio de Nebrija, who is somebody very important that worked for Isabel and Fernando, especially for Isabel, who was a professor at the University of Alcalá de Henares, was the one to edit this manuscript. And it was a project for Cisneros, who was a very important bishop in Spain who helped, the cardinal became Cardinal Cisneros, to help Isabel and Fernando to reform this Catholic faith with the introduction of things that we all know, like the Spanish Inquisition and other reformation of how the faith is viewed in Spain. Between 1984, I was born in 84, so it's almost 40 years ago, and 87, there was a publication of this full set in Valencia. Actually, Valencia was the place where Juan Luis Vives was born, another important humanist linked to Catherine of Aragon. And it reproduced the volumes 1 to 5 from the library of the Jesuit Society at Rome, founded by a Spaniard. And then the 6th volume was translated directly from the volume at the Complutense University Library. So that's a beautiful place to visit. I would highly recommend to see Alcalá de Henares. That's 35 minutes from central Madrid. And it's a beautiful place. It's got a statue that they dedicated to Catherine of Aragon on the 500th anniversary of her birth. Okay, what is this? Okay, so you can always go and see. I marked the statue there for you, and it says, just says that she was born there, and like you can see in the map, it's not very far from Madrid. So it's a great place to visit if you are thinking of going to Spain. Okay, so when I started thinking about this talk, one of the first things that came to my mind was that I believe that Catherine of Aragon is a Catholic icon because she was the daughter of 2 Catholic icons, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, who received from the Pope the title of the Catholic Monarchs. So, I mean, I don't think you can get any more Catholic than that, right? And she grew up there, like we said, correct? She was there for a long time. So she was raised by her parents. She traveled with her mother, and often, because during this time, it was not always easy at the beginning. There were still some problems going on with the Civil War that Isabella had to, Ferdinand fought, and Isabella was present there as a protective figure and as the person who was going to inherit the title of Queen of Castile. After they won the war, it was all easier. But in this time when Catherine was born, the war is still not finished. So the first years is still a bit tricky, but as soon as the war finishes and they also start to receive fame from their funding of the voyages west of Columbus, as we all know, and other things that happen, they become really, really, really famous in all of Europe. So I thought, well, the first reason why Catherine of Aragon is a Catholic icon is because she's the daughter of 2 Catholic icons, of course. And the court of Isabella and Fernando, it was basically centered around the Catholic faith. So in this, I brought you, there's very, very good. So in the Prado Museum, they have redone all the all the rooms for the 19th century historical paintings, and now you can see all these paintings of the 19th century that Spanish painters painted of the court of Isabella of Fernando. This is how famous they were, that in the 19th century, in the same way that was happening in England, in Spain, there was a trend to paint these scenes of the reign of Isabella and Fernando, because it was believed to be a glorious time. So you can see very big paintings at the Prado Museum in the 19th century rooms, like I said, with depictions of this is, for example, the procession before the baptism of Catherine's brother, the heir Juan, who died shortly after getting married to Margaret of Austria in 1497. Or, for example, there is another very nice painting of, because this is something that was spread since the death of Isabella, really, because she was famous since her life and just after her death too, of her overseeing the education of her children, because this is something that is very important in the case of Isabel of Castile, is that she took charge of her own education in Latin, which was the vehicle for the Catholic faith, as we know, but also she undertook the education of her children. So she oversaw the education of Juan, the heir, Prince John, and her 4 daughters. She had, the first one was Isabella, who's named after her. Then they had Juan, and then they had Juana, the daughter who succeeded Isabella afterwards, but never ruled. That's another debate we can have another day. And then the 2 youngest ones were Mary and Catherine. Mary would become Queen of Portugal. Catherine would become Queen of England. But the 2 youngest ones were always together, and they were taught by an Italian priest called Alessandro Geraldini, and his brother was also in the court of Isabel. And I believe in this depiction, it's trying to represent probably the Geraldini brothers over in this corner, where you can see the teachers behind the queen, and you can see the little Catalina showing her mom something she had written. We have the account of Isabel is so rich that we know that the children had many of these things. So despite the fact that this was a painting done in the 19th century, we can they can pull from all the sources to know that things like, for example, that they were trained in music, they were trained, they had their own desks, they had their own manuscripts. Isabella actually gave Catherine several printed books and manuscripts before she left. The majority of them were religious, and obviously the manuscripts were books of hours and other types of prayer books, richly illuminated. So this is a very magnificent court that revolves around the Catholic faith, where Catherine of Aragon grows up. I wouldn't say it's very different to the court of Henry VIII in terms of the Catholic faith. I think that Henry VII, sorry. I think that Henry VII was also someone who was very close to the Franciscan movement, like Isabella was, and he also fostered similar types of projects than Isabella and Fernando. Many of the times I would think even mimicking them, because he was aware of all the things they were doing, because he came to the throne slightly later. I think it's not because, it's just they're doing a great job, let's do similar things. And it was just the trend at the time too. So he has Italian humanists come to England too. And those are the people that later fall into the service of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and she has great relationships to a lot of these humanists who have been relevant in the reign of Henry VII. So it's really, Catherine continues that trend that Henry VII starts, and she continues it with Henry VIII, and it's really Henry who breaks with all of this, obviously not Catherine. Also, the Catholic monarchs, Isabella and Fernando, are very famous because of obvious reasons, right? Because they established that, this is another 19th century painting in the Prado Museum of the arrival of Christopher Columbus from America. So this obviously makes them famous because they are the first ones, first Europeans to establish this back and forth with America and establishing that carries on to establish the Spanish Empire. So they are viewed in Spain as the founders of the Spanish Empire too, and the Spanish monarchy, of course. And also because they are very famous because for many centuries in Spain, the Christian kings had been trying to what they would say unify religiously the Iberian Peninsula again. For many years, the term was used in Spain was reconquista, to take back the lands that had been taken by the Muslim. And in 1492, this is when this happens, when the city of Granada and therefore the kingdom of Granada surrenders to Isabella and Fernando. This is another famous painting that is in the Senate of Spain. That is a depiction of Boabdil, the last of the Nasiri kings, to giving the keys to the city to Isabella and Fernando, who, by the way, as you know, took over the Alhambra, the castle of the Alhambra, the palace of the Alhambra, and they were marveled. The Spanish monarchy later developed in the Alhambra, like there was another palace built. It was respected in that sense because it was obviously admired because of its beauty. So there is a transition. For example, I was able to record that the bells for all the kingdom of Granada, for all the churches, were sent by Henry VII. So there's also an involvement of other European monarchs to help the Catholic faith get restarted in Granada after the surrender of the city. And also they are very important because they are active patrons of arts and culture, with like I said, the fostering of translations, but also the introduction of a new type of art where they start to be relevant. Their portraits start to appear. Excuse me, I'm going to drink a little bit of water. They start to appear in paintings because the figures of the monarchs with the beginning of the modern age is starting to be, they want to be more and more relevant. So in this case, this is another painting of, it's called La Virgen de los Reyes Católicos, because they appear. And this is obviously not just a religious painting, but also a political painting, because they appear, the king and the queen, Isabel and Fernando, with their heir and their eldest daughter. So obviously it's also a political statement, not just a religious painting. So in Spain, the Catholic faith of Isabel and Fernando is very representative of the type of Spanish Catholic tradition, and that's why they're two icons. They kind of establish that image, and still to this day I think they're pretty representative. You would ask people in Spain, they would say they're obviously Catholic icons, yes. During this time, Catherine learned many things, and one of the things that I was trying to study and to establish when I was doing my dissertation was whether she was at this time connected to the artists that were working for her mother. So we know by the accounts of her mother that many goldsmiths and artists were involved in putting together what was her dowry. Her dowry was set not only in money, but also in jewels and plate. And also they had to provide Catherine with all the things that she would need when the alliance with the Tudors was established for her to marry Arthur Tudor. The first agreement was signed in 1489 in Mérida en el Campo, but because of the instability that the Tudor dynasty still had, they waited, and it was not until 1496 in London that this was really established. And after that, we see an increase in the accounts of Isabella of things for Catherine. For Catherine, she's starting to get ready to go to England, and there's a special treasurer, the treasurer of the extraordinary, called Alonso de Morales, actually one of his nieces travels with Catherine to England, that goes and he's the one who accounts all these pieces that she takes, all this trousseau. There is even one of the accounts is just all the pieces that she was going to take for her own chapel. So she's got all types of items to establish just a moving chapel, to go from one side to another, to just establish her own. And many of the items there have her coat of arms as Princess of Wales. So there's an exchange already with the court of Isabella and Fernando, because they are all these items go to England, and then obviously when she does marry Henry VIII, they become part of the royal collection. But also I was trying to research if she was because the sources tell us that she was so similar to her mother, and then I found evidence that she was inclined to Netherlandish art and to other artists. I tried to research if she was involved, or if she had been painted by any of the artists that Isabella had under her service, because in the case of painted works, this is a very innovative part of Isabella's patronage, because it's leaving behind that idea that works of art need to be they're good because they are expensive. They're good because it's got quality. In the case that we see that with the increase of painted works in collections, right? Because a tapestry is always going to cost more. You're going to make it in gold thread, and you can always use that gold for something else. But in the case of a painting, you don't have much use for it other than admiring it or using it for your devotion or whatever, like things like that. That's how we start to see that collections go from being medieval to being more Renaissance, because it's the artwork for the artwork, right, for its quality. And Isabella started to do this, and it's developed later more by her successors. But in the case of Isabella, she has the first painters, pintores de cama, these painters that paint for her, and they do works that have been identified. The most outstanding one, I would say, probably are, well, there's two types. Is the portraits of several of the royal members of the family. So Isabella is depicted, but then there's a debate over whether her daughters are depicted in others, because we don't have, for many years, we haven't had a clear image of any of the daughters of Isabella and Fernando, whereas we have had a clear image of the Queen. So it's easier to identify portraits of the Queen, obviously. And then also religious paintings done by these mainly two artists that she has in her service. One of those is Michel Setau, and the other one is Juan de Flanders. And these in these religious paintings, especially in this project that they do together called Políptico de Isabella Católica, which is a devotional piece that had many panels with representations of the life of Christ and the Virgin. It seems like it has portraits of people in them. So I've always tried to identify Catherine in those, or likenesses of her, because what I established when I was first studying her is that we didn't have a clear image of her. So it's very difficult to identify her in paintings or in other depictions. And another important thing that I, as well as this relationship with these artists, another important thing about Catherine getting ready to go to England was that she did one of the, probably arguably the most important pilgrimage in the world, maybe. I'm not sure. We could debate that. Maybe after in the questions you could let me know what you think. But she did the Way of St. James. There's several ways to do the Way of St. James. It's not only from the Pyrenees to Santiago de Compostela. You can also do different routes coming from the south of Spain into Santiago de Compostela. From Portugal, there's different routes too. So when she left Granada in 1501 to go to England to marry Arthur Tudor, she stopped at several places and did this pilgrimage to get ready to go to England, because St. James is the patron of Spain. This was very relevant too, because it was her farewell from Spain, really. So she visited the royal monastery of St. Mary of Guadalupe in Extremadura, for example, where her uncle and predecessor of Isabella was buried, Henry IV. She also obviously visited the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, where you can visit the relic of Santiago. And then they said they went to La Coruña, also in Galicia, because that was the port that they were going to leave from. They had a minor setback because they weren't able to cross over. They had to stop in a small village in the north coast of Spain, near where I'm from. It's called Laredo. But then after a month or so, she embarked all the way to Plymouth and then to London. So why I'm telling you this is because you have to think that for Catherine, throughout her life as a Catholic person, one of the most important things was pilgrimages. And we were talking before about Walsingham, and she was very tight to that particular pilgrimage, and for this for her was very important. So I can't even imagine what it meant to her when she, well, for her daughter, for example, who was also very, very Catholic, what it meant to her when these shrines and places that Catholic people would go to, pilgrimages, were destroyed, because this was something really important to them. So I think that it probably set her mind to her task when she did this. And I haven't done the Way of St. James myself, but I've heard people say that it does transform you, both spiritually, but it's also, since it's something you accomplish, it's also, for many people, it's a transformation process. So I think this is what happened to her, and she always kept it close because she kept doing these types of religious pilgrimages. So, but then things didn't go very well, as we all know. Catherine was in the author dies, and then not long after, her mother dies too in Spain. This is another one of these magnificent paintings that I was telling you about in the Prado Museum. This is one of the most visited ones, because it's called Queen Isabella giving her last will, saying her last will, because it is exactly that. And in that last will, Isabella states that her heiress is her daughter Joanna I, who becomes Queen of Castile. But despite the fact that she should have ruled, her father ends up being regent until her son Charles V becomes king of Aragon and Castile, of the Spanish monarchy, of the whole Spanish monarchy. So when this happens, Catherine becomes unprotected, let's say it, because Isabella was really the figure that was giving her the richest of the both kingdoms was Castile. So that's where most of the dowry money was coming. So Catherine, for that time that she is in limbo after the death of her mother, and first of Arthur and then her mother, she's in a very difficult situation. So what she decides to do is become a defender of the Spanish monarchy and an ambassadress of the Spanish monarchy by doing something that she had seen her mother do a lot, and her father, especially her mother, which was to find matches, to find marriages, to strengthen that alliance, because she wanted to stay in England and marry the new Prince of Wales, who was future Henry VIII. She negotiates several marriages, first to marry Henry VII, first there's some debate, because we could debate about this, because Henry did manifest that maybe he wanted to marry Catherine, but this was overruled. Isabella said no way. So I think what Catherine is trying to do is, she knows Henry wants to strengthen the alliance with Spain, so she's trying to find a match for him. He wants to marry his sister, the Queen of Castile, but she's confined in 1509 in Tordesillas, so it's very difficult for her to become anyone's wife, because she's too much of a precious price for Ferdinand. So Catherine and Ferdinand start to talk about another match, which would be the Dowager Queen of Naples. So this is one of the negotiations that Catherine is involved in, and the other one is to marry her nephew Charles, to Mary Tudor, Henry VII's daughter, not Henry VIII's and Catherine of Aragon's daughter, Mary, Queen of France. And because she is involved in this and she's an ambassadress, she sends letters to her cousin, the Queen of Naples, when John Steele is sent to visit her to carry out a whole report of how this person is and this woman, and if she's going to be a good suitor for the English king. The report doesn't mention anything about her faith. It's more concerned about the way she looks and her position in court. So it doesn't seem like Henry VII was too concerned about but at the same time, it was well known that these women in the court of Valencia were very, very pious. So maybe he didn't need to know because he already knew. And one of the things that is very important about this report is that a portrait is commissioned for Henry to see this Juana, which is the name of this dowager queen that lives in Valencia. Because obviously when Isabella dies, Ferdinand has his court in his Aragonese kingdom. And also I've translated this because I'm not sure, and I'm not aware if there's an English translation of the whole section of this, but this is what happens when the imperial ambassador comes with a portrait of Margaret of Austria, who Catherine of Aragon knew fine well because they had been together in the court of Isabella and Fernando when Margaret of Austria married her brother, and this ambassador brings two portraits of Margaret of Austria for a rival marriage. Just a second, I'm going to drink some water. So at this time, there's a conflict between Philip of Habsburg, who is the new king of Castile by marriage to Juana, and Ferdinand. So this is what a lot of people have been debated over. Why did Catherine of Aragon mention Michel Citeaux in this time in 1505? Is because she is she's negotiating another marriage for the King of England. So she doesn't want Margaret to become the new Queen of England, especially because she believes that this is something that Philip is doing to undermine her father's alliance to the Tudor king. So she doesn't want that. This is how she starts to act as an ambassadress. She says that the portrait of Margaret is not very good, and that Michel Citeaux would have done a better job, like you saw. And I just brought you two portraits. The one of Margaret of Austria is the one that Catherine saw, in fact, because it's still in the royal collection. The other one is the famous portrait. Is this Catherine of Aragon? I think you all want to know if I think it is. I think it is Catherine of Aragon. Why? There's several reasons. First of all, there are several portraits in this collection in Vienna that are linked to Catherine of Aragon or people in her sphere. And this collection started from the imperial collection. The Kunsthistorisches Museum started from the imperial collection. So a lot of the things that these the relatives of Catherine would have owned, like Charles V and Margaret of Austria, and not all of them, but many of the things would have ended up in this collection. Also because Max Friedlander already in 1912, I think it was, he proposed the identity of Catherine of Aragon for many reasons. The first one is because the painter is worked for Isabella of Castile for over a decade. So that's a big clue, obviously. He starts to be in the sources in 1492. It's not very clear when he disappears. There's some money that is owed to him. So it's not very clear when he leaves, but now it is believed that he left with Philip of Habsburg and Joanna of Castile. And Friedlander said that there were several clues in the portrait, like the little Gothic C that she wears in her, you can see in the front here of her dress. Well, I have found C's in relation to Catherine, and they would have been, some of them would have been in the Gothic style because these were part of her dowry. And many of the dowry pieces of Catherine of Aragon were done in a Gothic style. So this would be consistent. Then the shells of the Santiago, no, the St. James shells, that could be a reference. And also, obviously, because of the letter K in her necklace. But I think there's a very important thing that I haven't read about, and I think it's very important. There's two versions of this portrait in the same collection. I don't think they're both executed by the same artist, but they're definitely the same model, same person. But in this one, the woman has a halo over her head. So this is called, so this is a portrait that's been made into the divine. So this person has been made a saint, right? But if you notice, this person doesn't have any attributions of a saint. If it would have been St. Catherine of Alexandria, she would have had to have the sword or some of the attributes that we find when we see St. Catherine of Alexandria. But this is a regular portrait of a high-ranking woman that now has it, and I believe this halo was added later on. What I'm saying is, I believe that this portrait belonged to someone who owned it, and when Catherine of Aragon went through her divorce with Henry VIII, this is when probably at this time or later on, this halo would have been added to this portrait. Doesn't make sense to have a halo over a portrait of a noble woman otherwise. And then because this woman was painted by the same artist in other portraits, and in the case of this one that they found the match, the other person is believed to be Diego de Guevara, who was one of the main ambassadors who negotiated the marriage of Catherine of Aragon and Arthur Tudor, and who worked for Margaret of Austria. So it would have been quite possible. And he was from the same city I am. So yes, this is another clue. And then also in the third, there's a fourth one of this woman depicted as the Virgin with the child in Budapest too. But this one is the woman depicted as Mary Magdalene, and they are in the inventory of Henry VIII. There are some of his plate goods that could match the description, what this jar that she's holding of ointments looks like. So this one is in the Detroit Institute of Arts, and in this case, it is identified as Catherine of Aragon. I know there's a lot of debate over this portrait, but in the case of the other sitters that I've seen, it is true that it could be Mary, Queen of France, but at the same time, the argument that there was a jewel given to her, it doesn't match. It's not the same jewel. So why would we think that if the jewel is not the same? Catherine had many jewels with case. So I think there's a stronger argument for the case of Catherine of Aragon. And in that case, we have several portraits of her depicted as Mary Magdalene, as the Virgin, or in the other case as a saint, because that's what that halo would have done to that regular portrait that we were talking about, right? It's also very important that she is an ambassadress for the Catholic faith in England, because she strengthens the alliance with the Spanish monarchy, who at this time is already having trouble in the empire with Martin Luther and the Reformation, the beginning of the Reformation. As we all know, that in the 1520s is already raging, and by this time, what Catherine secures after she thinks that Henry is going to marry Mary to a French prince if she doesn't act quickly. She works to establish an alliance and a marriage between Charles, who she had already tried to marry to another Mary, now to her daughter. And there's a document of this alliance in the Archivo General de Simancas, where there's a depiction of Henry enthroned, and these miniature portraits that most probably were executed for this betrothal marriage that strengthened the Catholic faith. The problem was that the age gap was so big that Charles decided and ended up marrying someone else. He ended up marrying his another cousin, Isabella of Portugal, in 1526. So this is right around the time that the marriage between Henry and Catherine really starts to be rocky. So it all makes sense when you understand the diplomatic context. Catherine of Aragon is also a Catholic icon because, and this is not something that is known, but it should be, she was defenders of the faith. This is something that it's always linked to Henry VIII, but she was also involved in all these projects that he was doing with Rome, and so she was called this by, for example, I have it here in a note, Friar Alonso de Villasanta, who wrote a work for her against Martin Luther, and he calls her in the dedication defenders of the faith. So this is something that we need to start to think about. And then when we look at her letters, she is constantly thinking about God and divine providence. So it is this defenders of the faith is something that is very constant in her life. For example, this is the letter that she sends to Henry VIII after the Battle of Flodden Field, when King James IV of Scotland was killed. So look, she mentions our Lord, then God. She mentions God twice. She says that she prays. Then she says she's going to see Our Lady of Walsingham, something that I promised so long ago. So she's very focused on her Catholic faith, and it's very interlinked to her queenship. That's what I'm trying to say with that. And also with all her artistic patronage, she's also very involved in patronage that is linked to the Catholic faith. And there's several items that you can find today in museums that are of religious nature that are linked to Catherine of Aragon, like the Howard Grace cup that is believed to have a relic of Thomas Becket on the right, or this other relic that was recently first published in the Tudors, Art and the Majesty in Renaissance England, that catalog about that exhibition they did at the Met. But it's usually in the Tesoro di San Lorenzo, in the Basilica di San Lorenzo in Florence. So this is how far the Catholic faith of Henry and Catherine went. In the website of the Met Museum, you can also see amazing pieces like her rosary. And in this case, they know a lot of these things, they know it's Catherine's and Henry's because they have their initials, or they have like their symbols. So in this case, it has their initials. I would recommend you to look because it's got different scenes and they're all carved in wood. So this is a very good item to go in and check because it's a rosary and you can see bead by bead all the scenes that are carved in that rosary. And then one of the last things I want to talk about is I think one of the most important, I would say the other very important reason why Catherine of Aragon is an icon is because she became a martyr for the cause of the Catholic faith in England. My dissertation, I developed a term called the Court of Defense, which is basically the resistance to Henry VIII's decision to break from Rome and dissolve his marriage from Catherine of Aragon. And there's a lot of resistance, as we all know. But I wanted to point out maybe the most important people. So Henry Guilford is one of the most active ones, but Bishop John Fisher too. And this is very important because these are people involved also in artistic innovation and cultural innovation. Also, we have the imperial ambassador always, but there's a very important support from women. Maria de Salinas is very important. Mary Tudor, the king's sister, is very important. And then the queen's own daughter, who would become the first queen regnant, obviously, because she carries on her mother's legacy. But also in the Spanish monarchy, there's a lot of support for her from Emperor Charles. But the Spanish monarchy at this point is so big, and Charles travels all around the world, that to find support for Catherine, he involves his wife, Empress Isabella of Portugal, who is his regent in Spain, and also he has a Spanish ambassador in Rome that is trying to help Catherine, who even states at one point that she's become such an icon in Rome that her letters have become relics. So this is the level of fame that Catherine acquires in England when the whole, I mean, the divorce goes on for such a long time too, and it's such an impactful event that's why both of them become very famous too, obviously. And then she doesn't just sit there and wait for it. She acts on her own, and she has the best contacts. So she asked actually a reformer, Erasmus of Rotterdam, to write a book for her on marriage, because what she wants to do is Erasmus to give a statement that he supports Catholic marriage, because what Henry was doing was attacking what Catherine believed was a right for women, was the right to remain married once you were married, because that's what Catholic marriage was and is, right? So this was to defend. You have to think that at this time, women didn't have the same position as men. So allowing men to divorce would mean that they could keep the woman's possessions and then just cast her away. So this was not only a matter for Catherine, but it was a matter for all women in Christendom. This was very important. And the design of the frontispiece is by Holbein, who arrives to England the same year, and the dedication work is also survived. So it's very possible that it was Holbein who brought this work to Catherine of Aragon. And in the dedication of that work, Erasmus of Rotterdam talks about Isabella of Castile, and I wanted to point out this thing he says about her. He says that your mother gave a good aroma of God around. So she was refuming, or that Isabella, wherever she went, there was a good aroma of God wherever she went. I thought that was just very representative of what Isabella represents, and how they are talking about Isabella, Catherine, but then they're also talking about Mary. So there's a connection between the three women. I also wanted to talk about, in the case of the recent Hiva Castle, in connection to the prayer books of Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, this represents a bit of really the downfall, because prior to that, the manuscripts, I believe that the manuscripts in the 1510s and 1520s were richer, and artists that are leading in the introduction of Renaissance, like the Hornbouts, and I started to see a tendency moving towards more of a French style in the late 1520s. That it obviously is because of the introduction of that other side of faction of the Tudor court, represented by Anne Boleyn and her family. And just to finish a little bit about this, why there's a lot of debate, why didn't Catherine accept the end of a marriage? Well, for her it was a matter of principle. She could not accept that because if she would have accepted the marriage, it would have mean that she would have lived in sin for 24 years with the king. That was not something that she could accept. So I think it is, we have to think about her as a person who never changed what she thought, because to her there was nothing to change. There was nothing wrong with how things worked. She wanted to reform the Catholic faith, but she wasn't going to go as far as to attack something as important as the foundation of the Catholic faith, which is the Christian matrimony and the family, of course. And then also she became an icon, because when she was buried in, I think this was something that in the end Henry, he could have destroyed her tomb, or he could have, but he decided to respect Catherine a little bit. And I think when Mary, Queen of Scots, was also buried there in Peterborough Cathedral, that became an iconic place to visit. So I think that's also why the legend grew bigger and bigger of Catherine of Aragon, because of the place she was buried. Look at this place. I've been there for the Catherine of Aragon festival. You should all go. It's amazing. I also briefly wanted to point out that there's a lot to do about the Catholic faith and Catherine of Aragon, because there's a lot of works in the Royal Collection Trust that are Catholic works related to artists and themes that could be linked to Catherine of Aragon, like in the case of this adoration of the Magi, or this Virgin and the Child, or this other Virgin and the Child. These are paintings that we know were already in Whitehall in 1542. There's a lot of virgins, so a virgin is typically something women would commission more than men. From the 1520s too. And then it's very important to realize that there is a revival of Catherine of Aragon during her daughter's reign, obviously, and that there's even a biography of Catherine of Aragon written in her time, and there's also her memories brought back with things like the pomegranate and things. Mary definitely helped to start let's say the cult to her mother in England, because like Isabella, like Catherine did with Isabella, she was smart enough to know that her mom could give her legitimacy in that sense. And then Mary herself, in her depictions and in her artistic depictions, is represented again as a defenders of the faith. So she is taking that legacy from her mother and transforming it into her own. Well, this is what I had to. These are my thoughts about Catherine of Aragon as a Catholic icon. But I would really like to know if these are the same ideas you have, because I think sometimes when you're so deep in something, you might not see the big picture. So I wanted to know everybody's opinion about this. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent talk this evening. Fantastic, and lots of information there that I certainly didn't know about the Spanish collections. There's a lot there that is very interesting, because when we hear about Catherine of Aragon, we usually think of Henry VIII and anything related to Henry VIII.
I agree.
The divorce especially, and obviously her death, and then the burial at Peterborough and so on. But what we often forget is her childhood and her family background and where she came from and all the rest of that. And that's something that's often not emphasized, that she was Spanish. Essentially, she was Spanish, and her attitudes were Spanish because that was her upbringing, her culture, her beliefs, and so on. And we can't just, I think we claim in England that she's, the English queen, therefore she must be English, but she wasn't English. And to her dying day, she was Spanish, through and through, as anybody is who's lived that sort of life. And I think that's to emphasize, and I think that's really sort of, put things right in people's minds about that she was a Spanish member of the royal family, and that she happened to marry an English king, and all the rest of it that we know about. So it's fascinating things. If anybody's interested, I mean, there are lots of books on her. One by Giles Tremblett and another one by Alison Weir, for example, might be of interest to people possibly. I think we've got some questions. So I can.
Okay, let's see.
Yes, let me see. Let's see what we've got in the box. I think we've got quite a few things in the box. There's probably a lot there actually there.
Yes.
So one question: in English history today, Catalina is often dismissed because she became overshadowed by Anne Boleyn. How can we draw attention in England to the influence and importance of Catalina, especially as a Renaissance and intellectual queen?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm trying my best, but it seems easy and difficult, if this is an answer that it makes sense, because you don't have to convince many people, because when you talk to people, often people find that she is fascinating. But I think because the story between Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII is sorry, but it's so soap-opery, it just has a lot of attraction. So I don't think you can overcome that. But I have been trying by something that we don't think often about, is how cool they were when they started reigning. They were like the coolest king and queen in Europe. And this is not something that we hear about often. This is when Henry was even a nice guy. So maybe we should talk more about this time, the time, 1509, 1510, 1511. We don't talk enough about that time. We're always like obsessed with the Blackfriars trial and all of that. and the subsequent things that happened. But I think we need to come back a little bit and see the wonderful things that they were doing I mean, she starts before, but to think that she's the first woman that is accepted by a king to negotiate internationally with him, and it's saying a lot about Henry VII and Ferdinand too, you know. So I find the first 2 decades of the 16th century fascinating for this, and very underused. So I think more people should be studying this. I find the other parts attractive too. I think it's interesting to see how Anne Boleyn rises and all that, but I think it's just, I've heard about it, you know, already.
I think your women became more influential and more well known during the 16th century, much more so than the medieval period, because obviously we have Catherine, and we have Anne Boleyn and the rest of the wives and so on, and then Queen Mary and Elizabeth and so on, that women tend to have more and more influence, or more and more mention in the history books. I think Anne Boleyn is overexposed though, especially with the TV and media and books and things like that. It's almost like a cult, I think, really. I think it's overdone. That's my personal view.
The good thing is that it does attract people to history. That's what I think. Yes. So
yeah, it's drama, as you say. It's like a soap opera. It's a bit of drama. It's like, but
who doesn't like a bit of drama?
Well, yes, you know, Hollywood versions.
I think the important thing is to distinguish between historical research and people who are interested in history as a hobby, which is great. It's an amazing hobby to have, but I think they're 2 different things. Yeah.
One is often fiction, one is not. Anyway, another one here, continuing the question, why is it that Catalina, who was married for almost 2 decades and who was present in battles, there is so much misinformation?
Why is there some? I think despite the fact that these are very, very famous women, there's a lot of misinformation about these women still out there. I think in the case of Catherine, it's because there's a lot of sources that are in English that were compiled into the calendar state papers and the letters and papers a long time ago, and people have been pulling the information from there. So now when a lot of the Spanish scholars that are studying Catherine go into the actual documents, information changes. And also I think that because the trend to study women in this sort of new light is not that, I mean, it's powerful now, but it's sort of newish, you know. So I think it's still, I mean, you pick any of the wives of Henry VIII that were published in the back when the 500-year anniversary of the birth of Henry VIII, and the information about Catherine, when there was already publications of the accounts of Isabella and all that, it's minimal and it's not very good. So I think we'll see a lot more information coming, and I think before we settle the information, there'll be a lot of misinformation, because you have the older books and the new research, kind of like, you know, I buy a lot of books when I go to the thrift store, and sometimes they are fictional or historical books that are written, you know, 30 years ago. I still enjoy them, but maybe I get my ideas from there and about certain characters in the Tudor court. And then when I go to the actual documents or to the scientific books, I'm like, oh, this is not real. This is not what I thought it was. This person didn't do this, because in that book, it was just a license from the author, right? So I think it'll get worse until it gets better.
I think you're right. There's an awful lot in the 16th century that has been written, which is really biased and often inaccurate, or written for a particular reason. And I'm a great fan of Professor Eamon Duffy and how he's kind of rebalanced things that happened during the 16th century, and really his scholarship is outstanding, and has really put a different perspective on things than was put by some historians, shall we say, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Things are quite different now, and a lot more nuanced, shall we say,
yes.
to say the least.
Exactly.
Anyway, continuing questions. Anyway, there's as we know, the pomegranate is a symbol of Catherine. Mark says, in the Church of St. Lawrence of Bletchlade, Gloucestershire, there is an early 16th century chancel door with the pomegranate of Catherine. might this be simply because she was queen, or might there be a religious significance to it? I don't know whether you would know or not.
It's been a long time since I've thought of this church, but I did feature this church in my master's dissertation because I found out about this pomegranate, and also some information, but I haven't been able to that's why I didn't include it in my final PhD dissertation, because I couldn't find if this was true or not. But apparently there was not just the pomegranate. The spiral on the church was done at the time that she was Princess of Wales. So this church falls into the territories that she owned as Princess of Wales. And there was a theory, I can't remember which author was, that she might have an intervention in that church. So if that architectural, that's how she would have, and a pomegranate would have ended up there. Usually, if the pomegranate can be a decorative symbol, but when it depicts Catherine of Aragon, it's usually in a different shape. It's pretty obvious. And these usually signify that she's been involved in the architecture. I know that she was involved when she was a regent in the signing some plans with John Wastel for the King's College Chapel, for the finishing of King's College Chapel. There's other evidence that, for example, the disposition of the tombs of Henry VIII, and Elizabeth of York in the Lady Chapel in Westminster Abbey, and those of Isabella and Fernando in the Capilla Real in Granada are in the same disposition. The style is the same. They were both executed by an Italian artist. So David Watkin, a great historian of the architecture in England, proposed that not only this could have been an influence from Spain into England, this kind of like new way to display royal tombs, and but also the heraldry that is present in King's College has, and the way it's designed, it's similar to San Juan de los Reyes in Toledo, that was founded by Isabella of Castile and constructed while Catherine was a little girl. So the pomegranate is representing her power, really, if it's there to represent that she was involved in some sort of transformation of that church. I believe it could be that, yes. And then the other thing I wanted to say about that is St. Lawrence is a very important saint in Spain. So the Escorial, the monastery of San Lorenzo del Escorial, which was founded by Philip II and is the most representative palace of the 16th century in Spain, was dedicated to St. Lawrence. He's a very important saint in Spain.
Perhaps there's a Spanish connection between that church.
Yes.
Spain, I don't know. I'm only guessing, but it's
so. If anybody finds any information, send it over, please.
and there's something to be written there about that. Anyway, there's another question, if that's okay, from Monica. Can we say that Catherine had a position of power in the marriage negotiations, or was it more imposed from her father's politics?
So I think both. It's a complex matter, because she's a woman. She's very aware she's a woman, so she doesn't have the same position as a man. She doesn't have the same position as a bishop that would be acting as ambassador, or a merchant. That were usually the two types of ambassadors that I find are typically bishops or merchants that are traveling all the time, or high humanists sometimes too. So she's not a man. She knows that. So that is in detriment of her. But at the same time, there's one thing that I heard the director of the Prado Museum say once, and I was like, this is very true, is that gender it's an impediment, but status is more important. So she's the daughter of the King of Aragon. So no matter that it doesn't matter that she's a woman, she's the daughter of the King of Aragon. So she's talking because her father gives her the legitimacy and the power, yes. But it has to be accepted by Henry VII first, and then by Ferdinand, who accepts her as ambassador. So they're both giving her that power, but she's asking for it. So I would say she's owning her own narrative, because there's many women that were in this position that never took the chance to become ambassadresses. And why is that? Because she knew Latin. She could be an ambassadress. She was able to go over all these documents and be like, no, my father never does that. No, and this and that. So there was a combination of factors. That doesn't mean that she obviously is in the same position as Henry VII, negotiating by any means.
Perhaps her power came from her royal position to a certain degree.
Yes,
Anyway.
exactly.
She represented really, the history and the power of the Spanish crown, etc., etc. And that
well, it would have to come the way, also because the way she behaved. She knew how to behave. She had been in front of ambassadors all her life. She was taught how to behave. So she knew how to behave with Henry VII, and he probably appreciated it and said, okay, that's great. Why not?
She was tutored and schooled from an early age, and how to deal with situations and people and things like that. And you say her learning as well. I mean, learning and education was hugely important with these women as well. I mean, we think of Queen Mary speaking at least 5 or 6 different languages. You could converse in Italian with ambassadors and things like this. Which is quite, these were very, very clever women and very well educated women often.
Exactly. And in the case of, for example, her French manual, the way Mary was taught, it's all conversations that her teacher is posing as an ambassador, and they're just rehearsing these audiences with ambassadors. So maybe she didn't speak French, to talk about rocket science. Well, maybe because rocket science didn't exist back in the day, but you know what I mean? They were very ready to do what they needed to do. And the diplomatic world, these women become immersed in the public sphere because of Isabella of Castile. So that's how she triggers that the women are present. And then they just, once you start seeing things, you kind of accept them after some time, right? I think that's probably what caused a bit this, was the presence of Isabella that really impacted on Henry VII and other people. And then they just got used to women being in negotiations like this.
Yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, Jane says, absolutely brilliant talk, thank you. And
thank you, Jane.
Ellie says, great paper, Emma, love your work on Catherine.
Thank you.
Aoife says, thanks for a great talk, Emma. Aoife's a good Irish name there. Amazing, very amazing talk about a strong queen. Marta, what a wonderful talk. I think we're getting the theme here, aren't we?
Oh, I think, well, I must say, I know some of these people, so they're not.
So we can go on all evening. Anyway, Lynn Marie says, one of the chapels in Evesham is dedicated to Catherine of Aragon, and all her symbols are on the ceiling, the pillars and the beautiful walls. Well, lots of
pomegranates. Well, I didn't know about this, so Lynn Marie, thank you.
Evesham, yes. I know somebody in Evesham who's doing a PhD at the minute. I might ask them to see if they can do some research.
Oh yes, please, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I'll get in touch with her, and so that would be good, because I know
we're all going to be on a quest this summer to find pomegranates in churches.
Yes, we'll be looking for pomegranates. We'll be on a search for pomegranates everywhere.
Yes, please.
Until we found them, sort of, like a Easter egg hunt sort of thing.
Yes, exactly.
Angela says, wonderful talk, congratulations. Jennifer says, a really fascinating and I'm just trying to think if there's any more questions to actually ask you before you go, but Lynn Marie says, are there far more extensive details in the Spanish documents compared to the English ones?
Well, yes, I attended a talk the other day. For example, the 19 letters of Maria de Salinas have been found in the Archivo de Simancas. So, for example, yes, there's I don't think we're going to find lots of documents related to Catherine of Aragon more, but lots of things around her. So now we know a lot more about her entourage. So we're going to learn, I think, a lot more, studying more the Spanish archives about the connections, the actual economic connections that triggered this alliance. So the people that are coming back and forth from England to Spain with wool, with steel, and they're bringing things like, I'm sure, like artists, artworks, all types of things, because sometimes if you have like these gifts that are sent come with merchants. I know that, for example, the ambassador Pedro de Ayala sends from England, sends to Isabella in 1502 a big house with its windows, And I believe this is the model of the chapel of the author's tomb. This is because I think that it was Isabella who started financing the tomb of Arthur, and that's why it's not finished, because Isabella dies. It was consecrated afterwards when Catherine of Aragon is queen in 1516. So, and it's a merchant who's bringing this to Spain, to Isabella. So I think in those secondary the people in the network will find a lot more information about these exchanges between Spain and England. They're fascinating, because there's a lot of not just goods like products, but also we start to see artworks, people, a lot of people. Like, for example, I'm trying to think of relevant people, but one very relevant person that comes from Spain into England in this time that I say we don't study much of the 1510s is Cabot, who Sebastian Cabot is working for Fernando de Aragon, and he then goes to America. So I think we need to study more those connections, and probably, and in the documents of Catherine of Aragon that we know about, we need to delve more into those, because I've studied so many documents. I don't have time to go one by one each document and read them all. There's so many. So I encourage, if anybody's interested and wants to do some work and wants to ask me, I know about the documents. I don't know all the information inside of them. So we could find out more things, of course.
Excellent, excellent. We've had a very international talk this evening, because of course, Emma, you're in America, aren't you? And
yes.
We've had people listening from Spain, Mexico. I don't know how many other countries, but certainly those countries, definitely, because they've said so, and of course England. But I don't know how many other countries as well. So very, very international,
Nice.
which is good, actually, and it's great that we're becoming more well known throughout the. Oh, Poland! Yes, we've got a mention of Poland as well. I didn't know we reached as far as Poland, but that's great. Yes, so if anybody's from any other country, it'd be interesting to know what countries you're from and how you found out about it, presumably through social media like Twitter, I expect, which is the biggest thing, really. But that's excellent. It's been a fantastic talk. Do you mind if I just mention a few future things that are happening as well?
No, go ahead.
We have talks pretty much every month until November. Next one is 16th of May, Mark Sherwood, on Catholic troops in the service of James II and William III, 1685 to 90. 3rd of June, there's a York Catholic History Day at the Bar Convent. Bar Convent is very well known, of course, in York. It's where the hand of Clitheroe is there, and we've got the Tuesday, 6th of June, we've got Catherine of Braganza with Linda Porter, and the 11th to 13th of July, we've got the Centre for Catholic Studies at Durham, Popery, Politics and Prayer, British and Irish Catholicism, and 24th to 26th of July, the Catholic Records Society annual conference in Leeds as well, which I'm going to be attending and hoping to do a paper at, actually, as well. But I'm waiting to hear about that. So lots of things, and more in the future as well. So so we've got a packed program, really. So yeah, it's been an excellent talk this evening, and I hope everybody's enjoyed it. Yes, we've got Wales mentioned here as well.
Oh, yes.
So I think we're very, very international. So hopefully we'll continue to have the international sort of flavour in the future with the talks. And if anybody knows anybody who'd like to do a talk or would like to contribute anything to the newsletters and so on, we're always keen to hear about all sorts of things, research and interest and things of that sort. Yes, we've got some people writing in Spanish here as well. Yes, gracias.
Gracias, Marta.
Yeah, all that. But yeah, so we've had a great talk. So it's been fascinating.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Tim, for hosting, and thank you for the association for inviting me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
All right. Okay. All the best, everybody. Bye-bye then.
Have a great day, everyone.